Hello everyone, Matt here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over all the features in FSFO version 5 to include how to install. So with that, three disclaimers. First, not feeling very well, so I may have to pause at several instances and which could create or make this video very disjointed, so I'll apologize for that. Second, it's going to be a long video. I plan to talk again about every configuration option, which will take some time. And the third is some things may change between this and the full release version based on what the beta testers recommend. Again, FSFO is for all of us, and I would be foolish not to listen to what people want. So things may change. Okay, let's with that out of the way, the first thing you want to do is you want to install FSU IPC7. I still prefer to use this utility. It offers several advantages, although in version 5, SimConnect is there, so I can quickly swap over if I need to. All right, to install FSU IPC7, just click on the link here. Make sure it's for Microsoft Flight Simulator. I no longer develop for P3D or any of the legacy ESP platforms. So clicking on this link will download into whatever designated download folder you have. In most cases, it's going to be the download folder. It will create this zip. Go ahead and extract it. Right click, extract all. I like to extract it into the location that it's in. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Then what you do, click on install FSU IPC7 directory. Right click on install FSU IPC7.exe and run as administrator. Click more and then run anyway. This is a completely safe program. It's been around for dang near 3 decades now. Run anyway, and then go ahead and click yes. So for me, because I have FSU IPC already installed, I have to uninstall it first. I'm going to do that. However, if you do not have it installed, this will be the window you're presented with. Next, agree to the license. Now, critical, make sure you have WASM checked and enabled, right? That is what FSFO relies on to communicate with Microsoft Flight Simulator. If you do not have this, 90% of the features just will not work. So it's checked by default, just leave it checked. I like to also have the AutoStart FSU IPC7 with Microsoft Flight Simulator enabled. What this is anytime you start Microsoft Flight Simulator, FSU IPC7 will automatically be started with it. So basically, once you install it, you never have to touch it again. You don't need the documentation and you don't need the extra. Next, I never install anything into my program folder or my C directory, right? I prefer to use my user-created D directory, and I install everything into a Microsoft Flight Simulator Utilities folder, which I am going to do. Whoop, I already had it in there. Click install. Okay. You do not need a key for FSU IPC7. You can skip it. I just recommend if you have a lot of hardware, you have a good sim cockpit, consider FSU IPC7. I've been using it for 2 decades. It's kind of a ubiquitous tool for those with a lot of hardware, offers a lot of great features. So give it a look. It's routinely like the highest selling software on sim market. For now, I'm going to go ahead and skip. Yes, I want to add the desktop shortcut to the desktop. That's it. For those of you who've used FSFO in the past, you used to have to go in and make a configuration change to the FSU IPC config folder file. You just don't have to do that anymore. So that's gone. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and install FSFO version 5. Right click on it and click run as administrator. I'm going to go ahead and same thing. Yes. And I'm going to be presented with the license. I accept. This just tells us basically to run it as administrator, turn off antivirus software. I've already done that. And to ensure that you download FSU IPC7 with the WASM enabled. And we've done all that. So we're good. We're going to hit next. Again, I do not install anything in the program files. If you choose to do so, there will be an extra step for you after the installation. So what this will do is it creates just a whole bunch of permission problems depending on how you have Windows set up. So I always like to install it outside. That includes every single application. Back into my utilities folder, click next. Yes, I want a desktop icon, and let's go ahead and install it. FSFO is again a lightweight utility. So it should take less than 30 seconds to install. And here we go. And we're all done. So this is presented, it provides a link so you can view what's changed between each iteration of FSFO. Click next. I do not want to launch it just yet. So let me go ahead and for those of you who choose to install it in your default directory in your C program files, what you want to do then is you want to right click on it, go to properties, go to compatibility, and ensure that the run this program as administrator is checked. What this will do is give the program permission to write to its own directories. If this is unchecked, for example, your configuration changes may not save, your license that you enter may not save. It will create a whole host of problems. Just make sure it's run as administrator. So we're good to go. Now let's go ahead and let's fire up FSFO. And we're going to click yes. So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to tell me that the pilot log database does not exist. Would you like to create it now? This will be the only time you're going to be offered to create the log. What the log is it creates, it saves data from every flight that you use FSFO with. For example, you can see that my average landing rate is 276 feet per second. It categorizes all those flights into too soft, optimal, firm, damaging, catastrophic, keeps track of what aircraft types you're flying. My average flight score is a 90. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Essentially, FSFO provides you with a rating based on certain parameters either you met. In this instance, I I exceeded 30 miles per hour in the taxi, so I failed that and I was deducted points. We'll talk more about that though when we get to the company. If you click once on it, on the log entry, you can see more detailed data to include the route and all the specific information regarding the flight. So yes, I want to create a pilot log. It only takes a second to do that. And I am good to go now. I have my log created and I'm presented with the FSFO main screen here. It looks very similar with some minor changes to previous versions. We'll talk about the main screen here in a little bit, but let's go ahead and get right into the setup. What we'll do is we will work in the left and we'll proceed from left down and over to the right. So first thing you want to do is the audio setup. What I like is for the pilots, the pilot and the co-pilot, to have the output to my headset. That creates the impression that they're right next to me. And I'll typically like to have the crew set up to the speakers, so that creates the impression that they're behind me, right? Or that they're not right by you. It's for ambiance. But I'm going to have it set to headset because that's how I have the recording set up, and you wouldn't be able to hear it if I had it set up through the speakers. So first thing you want to do is you want to test.
Rudder full right.
All right, so I know the pilots and the co-pilots output is working. Let's go ahead and test the crew.
Dear passengers, welcome to our destination airport. Please remain seated until all docking procedures are completed and the fasten seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of our captain and crew, we would like to thank you for flying with us. We hope you enjoyed your flight today and hope to see you again soon.
Okay, so there's our the crew. We know that's working. The region right now, there's only 2 installed. There'll be many more regions to include human voice sets. But I want to make sure these 2 work because I didn't want to replicate all the errors that are going to be caught for these 2. I would have replicated them across all the other ones and I would have had to recreate them. So let's make sure all of these are right first, and then I'll create the other additional voice sets. What's cool about these 2, and which will be cool about all the other ones, is I went ahead and invested in Azure cognitive AI. So I have the same sounding voice sets now that are embedded within Microsoft. So if you're using the virtual ATC or the virtual Copilot within Microsoft Flight Simulator, you can replicate the voices, so they'll sound the same, which is pretty cool. A third option, which hasn't been provided before, is SAPI. So this is Microsoft synthetic voices, right? So let's go ahead and click on this. And what will happen is you'll be presented with another screen, and you can configure your SAPI file. So I'm going to go ahead and use, right now I only have 2. So David and Zura are shipped with usually every Windows installation. These are the 2 by default. Since I only have 2, I'm going to use David as my pilot and co-pilot. and I'll use Zura as my crew. I think Zura sounds more realistic than David, but so with these configured, let's go ahead and test them, and you'll notice how they sound different.
Flight attendants prepare for landing.
So that was David. Let's go ahead and test Zero.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for landing, please turn off all electronic devices at this time.
Okay, so those sounded pretty robotic, I have to admit. However, there are tons of sappy voices and voice sets available. This is a popular one that a couple of FSFO users kind of turned me on to. The reason why they asked for this setting is because a lot of people use ATC options that use Sappy, and they wanted to match the copilot that was part of that ATC program with FSFO, so it's the same voice, right? And it creates that more realistic environment. That's why I embedded the Sappy for option for those users. So that's Sappy. Again, if you choose to buy additional voice sets, they will be located here, and you can select them. Another option that if you use Sappy is you have the ability now to create your own scripts. This is the safety message script. You can alter it to however you like. You have safety, you have seatbelts on and off messages, stow items messages. Whoop, looks like that's an error. I have to, whoop, looks like we got a couple. So that's why we do this, right? So I'll have to make sure. But just because the default ones aren't there doesn't mean you can't create your own. But anyway, so for example, the seatbelts off sign, you can type whatever you want in here, and the FSFO will play that back. The only recommendation I have is to make sure you run it through a spell checker or something, because it's a dynamic synthetic voice set. So it's just going to read whatever you present it, and it will sound awkward if it's not spelt correctly. So by the way, we probably will. This is I haven't even released this for beta, so here's one bug. I'm sure we'll recover. We'll find many more as we work our way through this. But that is Sappy in a nutshell. I prefer to use the Azure set, so I'm going to go back to English, and I'm going to test it one more time. Always test when you change.
Rudder full right.
All right, we're good. The third test option is for RAS.
3,000 feet remaining.
All right, so I know everything is working. Just a word of caution: if you update your NVIDIA drivers, it will alter the output devices. So if you notice FSFO isn't working or you're not hearing anything, it's probably because these changed based on an NVIDIA driver update, because it installs its own virtual output devices, and it changes the number sequence here. So check it out. All right, so moving down now, we're going to joystick key and option. I don't have my hardware plugged in, but a new option here is it allows you to configure a keyboard setting, or a keyboard. So I'm going to select keyboard, and we'll talk about the first option, which is push to talk. Push to talk is it depends on which option you have set for open mic. As you can see here, open mic is enabled. So what that means is FSFO is with voices enabled. When I click this button and it's green, it's actively listening for your voice or your commands. This can create problems, though, if you have your cockpit in an environment that has a lot of background noises, like kids running around and playing and so forth. So it could misinterpret a command. Usually it manifests in like a bad flaps call or something. So that's open mic. If you configure a push to talk button with open mic enabled, it will suspend the speech recognition program while this button is pressed. So this is useful for VATSIM flyers, for example. What you would do is you would set your vPilot push to talk button to the same as this button. So when you're pushing your button to talk to the VATSIM controller, it will suspend your FSFO speech recognition. If open mic is disabled and you press the button you have configured for push to talk, FSFO will be listening for a command. It will not listen for a command unless you push the push to talk button with open mic disabled. So mute is also based on the speech recognition, right? I like to fly with open mic on. So when I hit this button, it will suspend FSFO from listening for any voice commands. I typically suspend the speech recognition when I'm in cruise, because I don't need the copilot to do anything for me. So, and I don't want any commands to be misinterpreted. So I will mute it. When you do mute it, this microphone up here will turn to yellow. Bypass, anytime a message is displayed here and an action is presented, for example, the copilot may be waiting for the packs to finish loading before he proceeds to the next item, but then there will always be, to bypass, press Control plus Alt, but you can also press this button here, whatever you configure. Word of caution, the time delays are there for a reason, so typically you don't want to get out of sequence by bypassing a time that exists for a reason. Action, what this is, if you depress whatever button you configure here, it would run the pre-flight flow, right? It runs the next flow based on the last, or excuse me, the next action based on the last action completed. For example, if you already completed the pre-flight flow and you press that button, it would go ahead and start the pre-flight checklist. Now, if you had last action was the after start flow and none of these were completed and you press that button, it would start the taxi checklist. It does the next action that corresponds to the last action performed. Minimize the copilot, or excuse me, when pressing this button or keyboard button, it would go ahead and minimize FSFO, and if it's minimized, it would restore it. So that's the commands in a nutshell. To set them is super easy. Just hit the set button. It should hit listening, and then you just hit whatever button you want to configure. So super easy there. By the way, FSFO Next had problems reading a few, I think it was the Gladiator was the big one that it just didn't pick up for whatever reason. Should be resolved here. Interested though, make sure the beta testers let me know if that's not the case, but this was completely rewritten. It should be much simpler than FSFO Next. SimBrief ID, that's coupled to this setting right here, download a flight plan. If you look here, you'll note that when FSFO started, it automatically downloaded my last SimBrief flight plan, and that's based on this option right here. If you have this option enabled and you recognize that your your flight plan hasn't been downloaded, make sure there's not a 0 that's before or after. FSFO, make sure that there's a numeric value in here. So if you enter like a space or something that's not numeric, it will enter a 0. We'll replace that with a 0. That's to prevent people from putting their SimBrief username in here instead of their ID. It has to be your ID. Again, if it's not working, just look for a 0 and remove it. Open mic, we talked about. This is your, excuse me, the RAS, right? The runway awareness and advisory system. Essentially, what this is you'll get a message. You'll hear approaching runway 33, on runway 33. If you push the throttles up when you're not on the runway, you'll hear the automated on taxiway, on taxiway. When you're on a takeoff or you just landed and you have less than 3,000 feet remaining, you'll hear this message.
3,000 feet remaining.
You'll also hear 2,000 feet remaining, 1,000 feet remaining, 500 feet remaining. RAS didn't work all that well for FSFO Next. Being kind to myself, we'll say 70% of the time, completely rewritten, and it works pretty well in this version here. Arrival updates, what that is you'll get updates every 2 minutes on the estimated time of arrival, estimated fuel, all those things that are associated with the arrival time. I want that. Career mode, what this is if you're flying a company flight, FSFO will look for certain parameters based on the options that you set. For example, if you must own the aircraft, when you connect FSFO, it will see if you own the current aircraft that's loaded. And if you don't, you'll be prompted that you don't own that aircraft in Dubai. So I'm going to fly in career mode. Kilograms, if you want the fuel and to be read back, for example, in kilograms and not pounds, you would set this to on. Verbose, this is for our blind flight simulators. I'm keenly aware that they use FSFO to facilitate their flight simulation. I wanted to make sure that this program had them in mind. So typically a pilot and co-pilot do not communicate at all during the flow portions of the flight phase. However, if you have verbose, the co-pilot will announce whatever it is he or she is doing during the entire flow segment. So we'll go ahead and turn that on just so when we connect, we can we can see how that works. Okay, so options. Autoflow, what that is this is a realistic feature. When it's on, the copilot will automatically start the pre-flight flow when FSFO is connected to the simulator and 30 seconds has passed. He will start the before start flow when all the doors are shut and 5 seconds has passed. He will start the after start flow when all the engines are running and they're stabilized and 15 seconds have passed. The shutdown flow is, well, let's go back. The after landing flow is started when the aircraft falls below 20 miles per hour. When they're on the destination runway. Shutdown flow is started 5 seconds after the parking brake is set and you're at the gates. So those are auto flows. Keep note, it's flows, not checklist. So checklists require interaction between the pilot flying and the pilot not flying. So you have to either hit the button or use voice command to call the checklist. So there's auto flows. Our rudder flight control test. So typically during the taxi out or after start checklist, you'll perform a flight control test to make sure the control surfaces are moving. So you'll move the joystick if you're on an Airbus, or the yoke if you're on a Boeing, full left, full right, full back, full forward, and you'll monitor to make sure the control surfaces are reacting to those inputs. If you want to include the rudder control into that as test, you can click this. I do not want the rudder control into that. Cabin messages, these will play, for example, the safety message that we just kind of looked at when we looked at SAPI. If you don't want any messages from the cabin crew, that's the flight attendants, select this to off. I understand there's a lot better programs out there that do a better job, and you don't want to have FSFO conflict with those programs. Same with the pilot messages, right? When the aircraft is taxiing out, the co-pilot will welcome the passengers aboard. When they reach the top of climb, he'll announce they're at top of climb. When they're at the top of descent, he'll announce they're at top of descent. If you don't want any of those, just go ahead and select those to select that to off. Okay, so configuration warning. That is if you're starting the engines and the doors are open, if you enter the runway and you don't have flaps set. These are major configuration errors with the aircraft. The co-pilot will go ahead and announce them. Okay, the reason why I started with operations and not SOPs is because several of the operations settings are tied to the SOPs. So, for example, set landing gear. I'm going to turn that to on. One thing I want to note for prior FSFO users is these settings are no longer tied. There is no longer a voice mode and there is no longer a button mode. So if these are set, the co-pilot's going to do them regardless of the voice setting. So set landing gear. So the co-pilot, if this is set, will retract the landing gear on takeoff and extend the landing gear based on this setting right here. So once you get to 2,000 feet AGL, the co-pilot will extend the landing gear. Now, if you want the co-pilot to simply retract the landing gear on takeoff but not touch it on landing, you would set this to 0. Okay, so that is set landing gear. Set flaps, very much the same. The co-pilot will go ahead and retract the flaps. Retract the flaps on takeoff. If you do not want the flaps, him to touch the flaps on the landing phase, you can set this to 0. So that means he will retract them on takeoff, but he will not touch them on the landing phase. So that's set gear and set flaps. Set autopilot. What that is if you have that set and engage VNAV is more than 0, the co-pilot will set the vertical navigation when the aircraft exceeds 1,800 feet above ground altitude. He will set the LNAV to on or engage LNAV when the aircraft is above 400 feet AGL. One note about LNAV. That is based on whatever setting you have in the flight plan for SID, which is your standard instrument departure. If you have this set to no, and you have a value greater than 0 here, and set autopilot is on here, the co-pilot will engage heading select and not LNAV or managed mode. The reason he does that is he assumes that you're going to get an ATC vectored departure, meaning you're going to manipulate the heading of the aircraft. So he's going to set the heading. If this is set to yes, he will engage the LNAV at this altitude. Autopilot is turned on at this altitude, 18,000 feet. Now, the reason why there's a little bit of complication here is to provide maximum flexibility. So if you had set autopilot on, but you only want the copilot to set the LNAV and the VNAV, but you want to control the autopilot, you would just put values above 0 here, and you would set that to 0. It is the same with the auto throttle disconnect and the autopilot off. If you just want the copilot to handle the autopilot on takeoff but not on landing, set values above 0 here, and you can set these to 0. So it's there for maximum flexibility, if you will. So that is set autopilot. Set altimeter. The copilot will set altimeter to standard when the aircraft exceeds this altitude right here, departure TA. He will set it to the standard pressure, outside pressure, when it descends below this altitude right here. Since these are 2 U.S. airports, they're 18,000 feet. Okay. Center tanks. If you have an aircraft that has center tanks, the copilot will turn off the fuel pump, center pump fuel tanks when the aircraft falls below 1,000 pounds. Set copilot MFD FMC. During certain segments of the flight, the copilot will manipulate his multifunctional display or flight management computer or MCDU. If you do not want the copilot to touch any of those, set those to off. For example, for the PMDG 737 on the after start flow, he will set his FMC to the legs page, while the copilot or the pilot should set his to the performance page. If you prefer to do that yourself, just hit that, turn that off. Call V speeds exactly like it sounds. Copilot's going to call V1, V2, rotate. Nobody calls V2 anymore, so just V1 and rotate. Callback numbers. When you, for example, on the checklist, you have fuels. Instead of saying check, the copilot will read back the actual fuel that's in the tanks. For example, fuel 17820 pounds. If you just want him to say checked or set, you would just turn this to off. Call engine start. During the engine start sequence, you'll hear the copilot say engine 1 fired, engine 2 fired, all engines stabled. If you don't want to hear those call outs, you would just turn that off. Call takeoff and landing rolls. So you'll hear, for example, in a Boeing, you'll hear takeoff power when the speed alive, 80 knots. For Airbus, you might hear FSRS, Manflex, 100 knots, and so forth. On landing, you'll hear 100 knots, 80 knots, 60 knots, manual braking. These are the takeoff and landing rolls calls. If you don't want to hear them, turn them off. This is the responses. So like we just said, if the for a Boeing, if the copilot calls speed alive, the response would be checked. If you don't want to hear that checked, you just would turn this off, because then you could simulate it yourself. You yourself could say checked. Similar to an Airbus, if you hear SRS, the response would be Manflex or Toga, right? But if you don't want to hear that, just turn that off. Call halt 400 feet, like it sounds on departure. The copilot will say 400 feet. That's typically, the reason why this is called, that's typically the altitude you would engage some type of lateral mode. So there you go. Call minimums. That's based on this right here. It's right now set to 200. So once the aircraft fell below 200 AGL, right, above ground altitude, or radar, for the radar telemetry, you would hear minimums. Now, something critical about this. If you set this to 0, this will override the set autopilot in the autopilot, auto throttle disconnect, and autopilot off. It would override those settings if this is set to 0. The reason why is FSFO and your copilot are going to assume you're performing an auto land, and you don't want to turn off the auto throttle and the autopilot during an auto landing, right? So that's critical on the minimums. Call glide slope alive, just like it sounds. If you have a ILS frequency tuned, course set, and the needle starts to move, the copilot will call ground speed alive. Call system changes. Every time you manipulate the LNAV, VNAV, flaps, speed brake, those system changes will be called. For example, LNAV on, VNAV on, flaps 5, flaps 10, so forth. Okay, let's go back to SOPs now. Okay, I wanted again to start with the options because a lot of the options are tied to the SOPs. Acceleration altitude, once you pass this altitude here, you'll hear the copilot call acceleration altitude. That's at that point you're, as the pilot flying, pitch the aircraft down and you start to gain speed. Landing lights, this is the altitude landing lights will be turned on or off. All right, we already talked about all the autopilot settings in the gear and extension. One other thing on the minimum takeoff and extension flaps, right? The copilot will not extend the flaps until the aircraft is below this altitude, even if you call via voice command. This ensures that we don't have any erroneous flap settings while the aircraft is at cruise. So you can use that to that effect. Ground speed warning, if the aircraft exceeds this miles per hour on the ground, you'll hear the copilot say, watch the ground speed. Power up source, GPU stands for your ground power unit. The other option is auxiliary power unit. This will be the option the copilot uses to establish power to the aircraft. Excuse me. For realism, you want to use the GPU. The APU, as many of you know, it's nothing more than a small jet engine. To avoid wear and tear on the APU, to avoid noise, excessive fuel use, most airlines require to use the GPU unless it's a quick turnaround, then you would use the APU. So GPU is set for here. This is tied to this feature right here, Copilot Power Up Aircraft. While you have total control of the flows in the checklist now, this option exists to define who's responsible for establishing power to the aircraft. I have it set to the Copilot. It's unrealistic, really, for the pilots to enter the cockpit in a cold and dark state, at least for larger aircraft and for mainline airlines. Usually the engineer will establish power. So that's why I have a copilot set to yes. This means when you start the pre-flight flow, the copilot, before starting whatever you identify for their actions to do, the first thing he'll do is start he'll establish power to the aircraft using GPU as the power up source. If you have this set to no, the copilot is going to wait for you to establish power to the aircraft before he proceeds to the next item. Okay, so that's these two. No power equals system test. This is the same as it's been before. If FSFO is connected to the simulator and it detects that no power is provided to the aircraft, it's going to assume it's the first flight of the day. Therefore, those system tests that are in the flows, he's going to perform those. Now, even if you have identified, let's say, a GPWS test to be performed within the flows, and you have the no power equals system test set to yes, he will not perform that test because those tests are only required for the first flight of the day. If you set this to no, he'll perform those tests regardless of whether he thinks it's the first flight of the day or not. A couple of taxi to landing lights is yes. It's just like it sounds. Anytime the landing lights are on or off, the taxi lights will be turned on or off. This is useful. For example, Delta, that's the one in their SOPs. They require the taxi lights to be on when the landing lights are on. Same with a couple of the runway turn off lights to the landing lights. Same thing. I do have to add another feature for the runway turn off lights. Several users have rightfully identified that these should be turned off when you're turning into the gate. You don't want to blind the ground crew. So what I'll do is I'll set a voice command for that. And I'll also have an option once the aircraft falls below 5 miles per hour that it will turn off the ground or the runway turn off lights. Logo and landing lights. So if you set this to yes, those will only be turned on at night to save money. They will not be turned on during the day. So that depends on whatever your SOPs is. Seatbelt policy. If you set it to 10,000 feet, the copilot will turn off the seatbelt at 10,000 feet and turn them on the other end. So on the departure, or excuse me, on arrival, he'll turn them on when the aircraft falls below 10,000 feet. He'll also make an announcement to the PAX that the seatbelt signs are turned off. You're free to move about the cabin. Top of climb and top of descent, that's where I'm going to have it set. So the copilot will turn them off when the aircraft gets to the top of the climb, and he will turn them on and make the appropriate announcements when it reaches top of descent. Approach on with glide slope alive. What this is when the copilot detects the glide slope is alive and you have set autopilot on, the copilot will engage the approach mode when the needle moves. So that's a new option. We've already been over the options. Let's go ahead and talk about operations. The first setting is the ground service. This controls all others. So if this is disabled, none of this matters. So we're going to go ahead and enable it. GSX integration. If this is enabled, instead of using the default Microsoft Flight Simulator ground option, it will use the GSX. It will manipulate the GSX menus to achieve whatever effect it's trying. The first one is the ground service that includes Jetway. Again, with GSX enabled, when you connect Microsoft Flight Simulator or FSFO to Microsoft Flight Simulator, and this time has surpassed. Actually, my apologies, that's the disconnect. So no time. When you connect FSFO to the simulator and GSX integration is enabled, it will manipulate the GSX menu to connect the Jetway. Even if you don't have GSX enabled, it will still toggle the Microsoft Flight Simulator default Jetway. Ground service includes packs and cargoes. What that is after this right here, you see packs and cargo. When you connect FSFO to Microsoft Flight Simulator, 300 seconds have passed. FSFO will start the packs loading. Now, again, I have GSX enabled, so the packs will be based on GSX packs. If you do not have GSX enabled, FSFO has its own simulated packs. Now, I don't want any to be under misunderstanding. There is no virtual. It is not nearly to the extent of GSX. It will just give you a count of 6 of 180 passengers have boarded. It will give you a time, I give you a passenger loadout. So that's how FSFO handles it. But if GSX is integrated and so on, then it will manipulate the screen to start the GSX boarding process. Catering, again, that's another advanced option. 120 seconds, so 120 seconds from when I connect FSFO to the simulator, it will start the catering service. Notice I have the packs set way after the catering and fuel services. That being the catering should be done notionally or close to being done by the time the passengers start to board the aircraft. Again, fuel service, same as catering. We just looked at that. The next two features are for GSX only. This includes the GSX push. So what will happen is when you complete the before start checklist is completed and 30 seconds have passed, FSFO will request through the GSX menu. Word of caution, you still have to identify which way you want the tail and the nose to go. So the screen will be left up there for you to click whatever one or two, whatever you need, whatever's appropriate for where you are on the ramp. So that's GSX push. GSX engine. Once the engines are stable, your copilot will manipulate the GSX menu to confirm good engine start. So you really don't have to mess with the GSX window at all with FSFO. He will do it all for you. The ground service includes sounds. What that is, if you're not using GSX integration and you are using the packs and cargo, FSFO will play its own simulated packs boarding or cargo boarding. So that's what that is. Ground service includes doors. Anytime the jetway is connected, FSFO will automatically open the door for you. When the jetway is disconnected, FSFO will close the doors for you. Flight service is fully automated. What that is for the especially if you're flying a company flight, the snacks and the meal services are all fully they're handled by the flight crew. They're not handled by the pilot. So, which is realistic in my estimation. So that's fully automated there. Save aircraft with logbook. Remember we talked about the logbook. When you save when you update the logbook right here, upload logbook, it will automatically save the aircraft location too. So FSFO has the ability to go ahead and move your aircraft to the last saved location. So that's what this option is. Automatically save it when you update the logbook. Ask to move aircraft to saved location. So when you start a flight, it's going to look to see if you have location data for the aircraft that's currently located. And if it does, it will ask if you want to move it to that last saved location. PAX boarding, and this is the time, right? Right is realistic, left is quicker. Same with the cabin service time. This is the amount of time it takes to feed the cabins. Right, realistic, left is quicker. So there we have it. That's our operations. Advanced, we've talked about this. Let's go ahead and just get through it real quick. The pre-flight flow delay. If you have auto flows on, this is the delay that it will take. So when we connect FSFO to the simulator, you'll see it will count down 30 seconds before it will automatically start the pre-flight flow. If, again, you have auto flows on. 5-second delay before start flow. So when you shut all the doors, it will count down 5 seconds before the before start flow starts. After is 15 seconds delay from when all engines are stabled and the parking brake is set. Shutdown flow, that is 5 seconds from when you set the parking brakes. And the after landing flow will start when the aircraft falls below 20 miles per hour. We talked about the jetway disconnect delay. So once you run the before start checklist, he will count down 20 seconds and then they will disconnect the jetway. And we talked about the catering. We talked about the before, so we talked about these other settings. These are the true advanced options. What these are, I try to make FSFO unique and make it work for everybody who uses it. So advanced options are my effort towards that goal. They are specific to individuals and maybe not used widely enough where they need to be main options. But I definitely wanted to include them here, and I will add to them. So if you ever need something that's unique to you, just let me know, and I'll add it here. The first one is called PMDG 737 V1. What that is PMDG has an option where you can have the computer call out V1. It's an option within the FMC. If you have that set, then obviously you don't want your copilot to call it 2 because that's redundant. So you would just set this to 0. 0 is on, 0 is off or no. 1 is on or yes. So I do want to have him call the PMDG V1 speed because I don't have that option enabled. Okay, so include airports in departure briefing. So you'll hear the departure briefing. You'll hear the copilot will say, departing Kilo, Bravo, Romeo, Golf, and to Kilo, Bravo, Oscar, Sierra. Now, a lot of users, rightfully so, think that sounds a little too robotic. So if you don't want those to be included within the departure briefing, you can just hit 0. I do want them included, so I'm going to hit 1. Skip flight plan check. I would recommend keeping this at 0. Several of the features we just discussed are predicated on FSFO know where you're going from and where you're going to. So I like to have them look for a flight plan and to let me know if a flight plan is not loaded so I can load one. Okay, so airport's name when using SAPI. If you remember, we talked about SAPI earlier. Instead of reading the Kilo Bravo Romeo Golf, it will just say Bangor International if you have that set to 1. So it will read the name as opposed to reading the ICAO code. Announce flows or stops, starts and stops. This will just say when you start a pre-flight flow. Remember, we talked that there's usually no interaction between the pilot and the co-pilot. The co-pilot just knows when they're supposed to be doing those functions. But if you want them to announce it, you can set that to 1. Call flap changes. Remember, we talked about the system changes, call outs here. When you move the flaps 5, flaps 10. There are people who use hardware that really confuses virtual copilot program. So the flap settings will be all over the place, all over the map until the hardware gets settled on the axis that it belongs to. So if you don't want FSFO to call flap changes, you can just set this to 0. Again, useful for individuals who have their flaps set to hardware. All right, so call speed check, vice the flap setting. There's SOPs, for example, British Airways, they don't actually call the flap setting. They'll say speed check. So the copilot will call flaps 15. And the copilot will manipulate the lever, and then he will check his speed to make sure that the speed is within the range to move the flaps to. So he'll say speed check when he completes that action. All right, so this is the last one is remind captain to program SID and star. Again, FSFO can program 98% of the FMC or MCDU. The one thing it can't do is set the SIDs and stars. So if this is set to 1 when the copilot leaves the for his walk around or her walk around, they'll say they'll remind you to go ahead and program the SIDs and stars. They'll say, hey, the FMC is all set, but the SIDs and stars. It just serves as a reminder for you to do that. Okay, the next is the GUI, auto connect to Microsoft Flight Simulator. So when I launch, if this was enabled, FSFO would be looking to connect to Microsoft Flight Simulator. auto, excuse me, auto open and close checklist. Anytime you run a checklist, FSFO would automatically open the checklist page so you can see what the co-pilot's responsibilities are and what the pilots are. App on top, this allows you to overlay FSFO over the simulator. Check for FSUIPC, just when you launch FSFO, just make sure, or when you start a flight, it makes sure that you have at least a minimum FSUIPC version required to work correctly. Check for updates. It will check to see if you're using the current version. This is the you can transparency, right? So if you set depending on what you have this set at, we'll go ahead and set it here, and then when you restart it, you'll notice FSFO will be a little more transparent than it is now. Okay, so that is all of our options. Took a while to get through, but I think it was worth it. Let's go ahead and move down. This is if you choose to buy FSFO. Again, there will be a default free version that you can use. But if you choose to buy a product license key specifically, this is where you would enter it. What's a little bit different in the past is you can activate it on different machines, and you don't need to request us to reset the key until you've activated it more than 4 times. So that's a change here. Hopefully, it will streamline the activation process for you. Okay, so this is a big new feature. This is the editor. This is what gives you the ability to manipulate your checklist and your flows. I will admit up front, I'm not sure how intuitive it is. I tried to make it the best I could, but just a little quick commentary. The reason why I never did this in the past, the whole reason why I wrote FSFO, gosh, 12 years ago now, is because I was using it was a great program, one of the earliest virtual copilots. It was called Flight Deck Companion. But one thing I couldn't stand about it is I was literally spending hours just building a checklist, and because you didn't have flows, but it had checklists, and I didn't want a program that required me to write or spend hours building profiles, which is why, and I thought many other people thought the same way. So which is why I just all the flows, they were all, I wanted to do all the work for everyone else. That's why I never had an editor. But enough people ask, and when people ask, you got to deliver. So that's what this is. What I'm hoping is if those individuals who create full stops for Ryanair, Southwest Airlines, or EasyJet, that they share them with me so I can add them so other users can use them, because it will take a while to build profiles, as you'll see. All right, so we'll select our aircraft. Let's go ahead and select. Let's select a pre-flight flow, for example. Here are all the actions that are associated with a pre-flight flow. You can see most are going to be the responsibility of the first officer. Only one is going to be the responsibility of the captain, and that's set the parking brake. Once you select a phase pre-flight flow, it will load all the available actions. So in this case, let's just pick a random one, right? Let's go ahead and I don't know which one. Let's go engine start switches. Let's start engine start switches. If you want to make sure the engine start switches are set to off during the pre-flight flow, you would select them. Look down here, right? Here's our available options. You see 0 equals ground, 1 equals off, 2 continuous, 3 equals flight. So you would enter who's going to be responsible for it. In this case, it's going to be the first officer. And then you would enter the value. So I want to make sure they're off. So I would enter 1. Everything's all set. I can go ahead and add that. There's your engine start switches. So now the copilot will check to make sure the engine start switches are set to off, that value. If you don't want him to perform it during this, you can just move it down to wherever you want him to perform that action. Let's go ahead and remove it. Likewise, let's just go over one more. Let's go over an FMC, or let's go over an MCP one too. So MCP pre-flight, right? You see configures the MCP. What that is the copilot's going to set the flight director. He's going to set all the things that are associated with the multi-control panel. So it doesn't matter what value you set here. You can set 1, you can set 0. It doesn't matter, because it's just the copilot's going to set the MCP based on that. If you select MCP pre-flight copilot only, he's going to set the altitude and the flight director switch only, right? That's his side of the MCP, and you're going to be responsible for your side of the MCP. So you gotta really know kind of the 737 operations in this case. One other thing, or a couple other things to make note, if you look at load, FMC load route, then what happens is going to be the copilot's going to enter the route information into the FMC for retrieval. But remember, you have to have the route downloaded into the flight simulator, or excuse me, into your PMDG work folder. So just remember that. And that's a PMDG requirement, not an FSFO requirement. And let me see if I can find that just for you real quick if you're not familiar with that. Just if you bear with me for 1 minute. So I think it's the work folder. So this is your where if you installed the PMDG into the default location, it's going to be right here. This would be the directory, except obviously it's going to be your name, app data, packages, all that, in the work folder. And as you can see, there's a flight plans folder. You have to make sure that whatever flight plan you have generated is downloaded into that folder. No numeric value, so it should be KBGR to KBOS. And if you're using SimBrief, of course, it's super easy if you just use the SimBrief downloader, right? For example, and this is a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm hearing here, but I'm just going to show you real quick. For PMDG aircraft, I've already have the directories all set. So all I have to do, well, I thought I had them all set. Oh, alphabetical order. So there you go. So when I create a flight plan in SimBrief and I download it, right? I can just download it into that folder and it will be all done. So there it is. That's the flight plan. So that's associated with that setting. Okay, so that's how you would use that option right there. Again, a little bit beyond the scope of what I intended to do, but just kind of wanted you to get a look. So that's for the PMDG 737. All right, so let's get back on track here. So that is your pre-flight flow. Again, the big thing I wanted to mention here, if there's a option that you don't see or that you need, just let me know. I can add them super easy to give you whatever it is you need to create the flow or the SOP that you want. So that is my whole goal. But big thing is when you choose an action, just make sure you have the right corresponding value down here. Another thing is you can have weights too. So if you needed to create like a delay or something, there's like a 0 through 600 second wait delay. So tons of options in here, but if I'm missing any, just let me know. Also, just know that your checklist options are going to be a little bit different than your your flow options, right? So for your checklist, you want to make sure that, for example, I'm going to select a passenger signs. And we're going to select, this is going to be your response. So I want the passenger, excuse me, yes, I want the seatbelt signs to be on. So I'm going to set the response to on, and down here, the value is going to be 1. So adding this, we're going to add it. The copilot is going to call during the pre-flight checklist passenger signs. And then if you're not using voice, he's going to expect the passenger signs to be on based on this value right here. If they are not on, he's going to wait for you to turn them on before proceeding to the next item, unless you click that bypass button I talked about earlier. So that is how you do checklist and flows via the editor. I am interested in feedback. I made it as intuitive as I could and as user-friendly as I could, with the full knowledge that it is still it's still going to take time for whoever decides they want to create that Southwest Airlines or that Ryanair SOP. But if you do, I would just ask that you share it with me so I can share it with other people. Again, I'm not charging people for additional SOPs. That's just insane. So we can just do this and just as a community, we can help each other out. All right, so that's the editor. Next is the company. So what I wanted to do with FSFO is give users a reason to fly. There are several awesome virtual kind of these programs already that can kind of simulate company on air. For example, my favorite is Airhauler 2. Love that program. The only thing is I kind of thought it was a little bit of intrusive when when you try to plan a flight, it takes forever, and that large screen. I know there's the pilot to airlines, or the passenger, or lets you simulate an actual career but not a company. I know those are great programs. FS Passenger was a super popular in the day. what I try to do is I don't have anything that's probably as good as either of those. I just try to take the best elements of all of those just to provide a simplistic but yet reason for you to fly without it being intrusive. So that is my goal here. This is just the start. I am going to build this out much longer. To be honest, this was fun to get away from doing something than just the virtual copilot to do something very different. So the first thing you want to do is I want to type the name of my company. I'm going to simulate Delta. You don't have to hit founded, right? It's going to do that. Money, we're at 0. Rep, we're at 0. Your ITA, that's going to be Delta, right? For Delta Airlines. This is going to be your primary operating hub, your ICOA. So that's going to be for example, I'm going to use Atlanta because I'm flying Delta. So when I create a company, what's going to happen is FSFO is going to use this right here, and half the scheduled flights are going to be either to or from this hub because this is your main operating base. And the code US. I'm a US based carrier, so that means most of the flights are going to be within the continental United States. If you were simulating British Airways, you would type GB or whatever country you wanna use. Options, yes, you must own the aircraft. So it's going to make you. Remember we talked about the career mode. FSFO is going to check when you start a flight if you're using a company to make sure that you own the aircraft. If not, it's not gonna let you start the flight until you purchase that aircraft. Loans are based on reputation. If you're starting out with a 40% reputation, you're only going to be able to take up to like $50 million loan. That's a pretty significant risk for the bank. As your reputation grows, you'll be able to take out larger loans. All aircraft earn income. So if you own multiple aircraft, you'll get a multiplier at the end of your flight based on how many aircraft you own. Company can fail if you couple catastrophic events, you fall below a certain reputation, you have your debt is too large, your company will fail, will delete, and you have to start over. Random failures, like it sounds, these are random maintenance issues that can occur. For example, landing gear could get stuck, flight director might stop working, indicated airspeed may stop. Now, not all maintenance failures are alike, right? There are some maintenance failures you can fly with, but if you fly with a significant maintenance failure, and that failure happened on the ground and you still choose to fly, you're going to get a significant reputation. You're going to get a significant fine, and you're going to get hit with a reputation. Now, critical failures in the real world are rare, and they are rare in FSFO. So, it won't, your landing gear, the inability to retract it is going to be a very rare feat among your career, just like it is in the real world. So while non-significant events happen all the time, right? So for example, you might not be able to use your autopilot, your altitude for your autopilot. That's not really a significant event. You can still fly the aircraft. You're just going to have to manage the altitude yourself. You can fly under that. And those types of problems are fairly routine. Significant maintenance issues are not. So FSFO attempts to mimic that. Random events, these are things that can happen. For example, weather may pop up somewhere and ATC has to hold you. So you're going to get a message saying, hey, ATC is holding you for, let's say, 20 minutes. Or they may have issues boarding the aircraft. They may have a medical issue. So you may be delayed in 15 minutes or so for boarding the aircraft. Random events are things that kind of interrupt the sequence of events of your flight, just like they do in real life. Include maintenance and insurance costs at the end of the flight. These are 30% of your revenue. If you have this on, you will be detracted from the total flight revenue here. So I had it turned off for this practice flight just to make sure. And as you can see, no many. But if you do, it will be 30% of your revenue, which is based on real world statistics. Include maintenance in, we just talked about that, excuse me. Aircraft start from last airport. I'm going to say yes. So every time you fly, you must start from the last aircraft or airport that you flew to. If you do not a big deal. You can still move your aircraft to the current airport you want to fly from, but there will be a cost that is incurred with that, and I'll show you that. Costs, these are updated automatically. You can't change those. These are based on real world fees that I pull from NavData or AirNav. Excuse me, I pull from AirNav. Prices, you can set your airline prices. be careful. The further you go to the right, you could incur a penalty. What the penalty attempts to simulate is your ticket prices are too high and your passengers are choosing to fly with competitors. Or so, especially if your ticket prices are high and your reputation is low. Like if you have high ticket prices and you have a 45% reputation, you're probably going to get hit with a pretty significant ticket penalty and lose that. So try to find the sweet spot right there and see what you can do. This right here, this is where you will buy aircraft when you connect FSFO to the simulator. This is the aircraft age, so 1 through 15, 4% deduction off the list price for the age for the aircraft. So you can buy used aircraft in this game. So there we go. So we have everything set. Let's go ahead and create the company. What will happen is you can see I have no schedule options here. When I create it, I'm going to go ahead and there will be once you refresh, there'll be a generated schedule. So FSFO went ahead and generated you a schedule. What you can do then is you can define the parameters of to have FSO generate a flight schedule for you to schedule to fly. I didn't put this, but what will happen is you get a 5% bonus too on revenue when you fly scheduled flights, so you can make more money. 25,000 is my max payload. I want to start and end from K Atlanta. I want short flights. Short flights are less than 500 nautical miles, and I want 6 legs. Go ahead and generate, and there it is. So there's my schedule from starting from K Atlanta and ending at K Atlanta. So all under 500 knots. Now, let's say you wanted to create your own schedule. You can do that, right? So I went to a database and I paid for Delta's real life 2023 schedule, and I put it into this format, right? Super easy format. This is the flight, semicolon, departure, destination, and these are the distance in nautical miles, right? Super easy. You get an Excel spreadsheet. You can create this in about 5-10 minutes. So these are all of Delta's flights, and I put it into the format required by FSFO: flight number, semicolon, departure, semicolon, arrival, semicolon, distance. And I created that, and I'm calling it delta.text. All you have to do is take this, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to put it into the directory. We're going to go ahead and put it in. Yep. If I can just get a second. Where is that? Excuse me. I forgot where I put it. Okay, my apologies. So to put it into the, I forgot, I installed it into my Microsoft Flight Simulator Utility Store. Where else would I put it? And if you go into that and you click on the company and you just paste it right there, delta.text, and then you refresh the page, there it is, delta.text. So there's the real. So let me go ahead and delete this. Just double click on it, and you can delete the current schedule, refresh the page, and it's gone. And now I'm going to create a schedule using Delta's real life flight schedule. So delta.text, I still want short. I still want 6 flights. And I want, let's go to, I think I'm going to fly out of Bangor. So let's fly out of Bangor, and payload is still going to be 25,000. So there it is. Now, noticed here that it starts with Bangor, and these are real life flights to Buffalo. It could not find a flight back from, I think this is Green Bay, back to Atlanta. So I'm going to have to deadhead back, which is going to cost money, right? I'll show that. Remember, 5% for flight. You do not have to do anything. When you start a flight, FSFO will automatically check to see if it's from this airport and to this airport. And if it is, 5% bump, and it will eliminate that flight, and then it will just leave 4 more flights left. So that's it in a nutshell. This would be if you own aircraft, and we'll do this. We'll show you when we buy one. They'll be listed here. And here's your finances. The items, whether it's a debit or credit, will be listed over here. Right now, we don't own, we don't have any money. And you'll see when we buy an aircraft, we'll actually go into the hole. We already talked about log, aircraft location. I think we already talked about that too. What FSFO will do is it will go ahead and it will save, show where your location are. Useful if you're flying a company. For example, this aircraft right here is located in Bangor, and you can just click on it once and it will show where all your company aircraft are. So hopefully a useful feature, hopefully useful too. Okay, so next is support. Self-explanatory. If you're new to FSFO, this will get you started. This text right here. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory. The show log. This will, if you're running into any problems, just go ahead and take a look at the log. See if you see any errors there. Let me know. Again, everything else is probably pretty self-explanatory. All right, so that is FSFO in a nutshell. Let's go ahead and talk main screen. However, I'm going to go ahead and launch Microsoft Flight Simulator, and we'll talk main screen. Okay, Microsoft Flight Simulator is firing up right now, but we'll go ahead and just continue to talk about the focus on the main page here while it's firing up. So starting again with the top, this connects FSFO to the simulator. Again, you need FSUIPC running for that to happen. This will pause FSFO. This is useful to avoid conflicts with other applications. This is your voice button, speech recognition. You turn when it's on, it will be green. When hard mute, it will be yellow, and then obviously off is red. We talked about this: minimize the input, minimize and exit. This is the home screen. This is where you'll operate primarily to launch to checklist. If you have flight plan loaded, FSFO, by clicking this button, you can get the current weather at that airport. This will be the current airport information, so your altitude, transition altitude, to include the runway data too, which is very useful because it includes the frequencies and the runway headings and the lengths and all that. We'll show this once we're connected to the simulator, but this is your load sheet, which is critical to ensure you have the correct weight and balance for the aircraft. This will be the log. This will show when you left the gate, when you arrived at the gate, when you took off, the M1 speeds, all that. These are your operations control. Remember, we talked about several of these when we talked about the FSFO operations options. And if you don't have these on because you want to manually control them, you can do that. So this right here, this will start the PAX or cargo loading. If you have GSX enabled, it will manipulate the GSX menu. Otherwise, it will use its own FSFO's PAX simulation. To feed your passengers, be dictated on where you are in the flight phase. So, like, for example, if you click the button once and you're flying for less than an hour, it's going to be a snack. If you click it again and it's been more than 2 or 3 hours, it will be a meal, and so forth and so forth. This is useful if you have the manual seatbelt option, as we talked about. This turns the seatbelts on and off on the aircraft. Request a cup of coffee from the flight crew. This is to inform the passengers of a delay. If you're on the ground, in the air, it will depend on the message that you get. Now, if your flight is long and you do not announce the delay, you're going to get a significant penalty. So make sure you do that. This is the passenger report. You'll get a status on the current rating and any penalties that you've incurred so far. Next row, this is your operation. So this will toggle the jetway, request fuel. This will request loading, baggage loading, so forth. This will request catering. Now, remember we talked about the ability to move the aircraft to the last gate or last saved location. This will do that. So if it has a location saved and you click this button, it will move it to that last location. And this requests a different gate. So FSFO, if you noticed here on the plans, it will give you a gate. So this is the gate within Boston that it's telling you you're going to arrive at. It's Echo 2. If you want a new gate, you can click this button. Now, you have to be connected to Microsoft Flight Simulator to use these options. So there are your operations options. Pushback.
FS Realistic connected.
So pushback is a feature that's also included in FSFO. You can use, if you don't have GSX, this is a useful utility. It can be fully automated, or not fully, that's a bit of a poor description. It could be partially automated. You can use voice commands, or you can use buttons to control where the aircraft positions. To use the partially automated one, you would hit the distance that you want to push back, which is, in this case, 100 feet. It's feet because the unit of measurement set inside Microsoft Flight Simulator are set to US. If they're not set to US, that will be meters. So if I wanted the aircraft to push back 100 feet with the tail left, nose right, this is the setting I would do. I would just hit play, and that's all I have to do. The ground crew would handle the rest of it. Alternatively, you can use these buttons to control it yourself, and you can also use the voice commands that have been part of FSFO for a little bit now. This shows your current speed, your current heading, and the distance that's pushed. So hopefully you'll find this a useful utility. We still have to improve the sounds on this. One of our awesome users is going to do that for us, but that's the pushback utility, and I'll showcase that shortly. So the plans are a critical feature in FSFO. That's why, excuse me 1 second, I'm going to load the PMDG 737 into Microsoft Flight Simulator. Okay, the simulator is loading up now, so hopefully we'll have it shortly. So as stated before, the plan is a critical portion to ensure the settings all work correctly. There are 3 ways to load a plan into Microsoft or into FSFO. The first, we've already demonstrated, is to download the SimBrief. Second option is to import a plan that you've downloaded from SimBrief, or even if you're still using PFBX or the really old but venerable FS build, any dot plan. So you can even use the Microsoft Flight Simulator generated flight plan. So you would select the option, hit go. The a folder will open, or excuse me, the option to select a file. Select the file, the plan that you want. Remember, it has to be a .pln extension. Click open, and the plan will be loaded. And we'll know because the distance will change here. This option right here asks, would you like to upload the flight plan to Microsoft Flight Simulator? What this will do is if you're using the default ATC, for example, and you click yes, you don't have to go into Microsoft Flight Simulator and load the flight plan. FSFO will upload it for you. If you're using the aircraft with the default FMC or MCDUs too, if you click yes here, this flight plan will be loaded into those computers. So I'm going to hit yes, even though I fly on BATSIM, so I don't really need the flight plan, but just to demonstrate. Third option is the manual option. Is calculate. So you can just hit KBGR to Richmond, for example, and then you can hit calculate, and then you see the flight distance change. So those are the 3 options. I prefer SimBrief, so let's go ahead and re-download the SimBrief flight plan. And there it is. So we know it's downloaded. Again, critical that you input a flight plan, or several of the features will not work. All right, so this is the operational flight plan. Hopefully the data is presented in a very easy way for you to, let's say, load the FMC. All the critical data should be here for you without presenting you with the entire operational flight plan. So you get your flight number, your cost index, the cruising altitude. This is the average wind, right? And this is the highest terrain altitude, if you will. So 3,200 feet is going to be our highest altitude that we have to avoid along the segment of the route. This is the heading, the altitude, the wind speed, and this is the fuel that you should have at each one of these steps. So you can check to make sure as you pass these waypoints that you have the required fuel on board. So that's what you should be doing. So there is your operational flight plan. And let's go back to home, and we are still waiting for Microsoft Flight Simulator to load. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here and be right back with you.